Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome along everyone. If you've read the title, you're probably thinking, well, we're only in February and somebody's already starting to do eggs. Shops have already started getting out things like the chocolate eggs and everything like that. And if you're one of those people that wants to make several eggs for Easter, I thought it was more of an appropriate time for now to actually put a video up on making an egg rather than literally on the Easter week. This is what I've produced. It's pieces of scrap wood laminated together, and I've deliberately done it so that the stripe on the egg doesn't run right down the centre. For the actual cup, I've done it the opposite way so that the actual sapele is actually in the neck. This is made from Iroko and sapele. It was just done from scraps of wood like that, just all glued together. On the lathe here, I've got a mixture of some Iroko and a bit of sapele in there. What I've done here is I've put this off centre, and to give you an idea, these pieces are about 44-45 mil wide, so the centre should be about 22-23 mil in the centre there. And what I've done, I've actually created a centre point for both ends, so there's 15 mil in that way and 15 mil in from this side, so that's why it's tipped it that way. And the reason I want to do that is that I don't want this stripe to go straight down the centre, so hopefully it just offsets it a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is just true this up. So I'm just going to use the spindle gouge now and create the shape. So before I get too thin on here, which isn't going to take much more before that falls off, I've got the shape sorted and I can now just sand this up. This has now been sanded to 600, and I'm just going to give this a couple of coats of sanding sealer and then just knock the grain back again in between coats, because it will raise the grain. But hopefully you'll see when we put sanding sealer on there just how nice this really is. This has now had a couple of coats of sanding sealer and just denibbed with 600 grit paper again, and I've also just taken this joining bit down a little bit smaller and just made sure that's sanded up under there. On a recent video when I did my open segment and tea light holder, I used shellac, so I'm going to use this on here again, and I'm only just going to wipe this on. Now, because I've put the sanding sealer on here already, hopefully this then shouldn't raise the grain, so just wiping it on. And I will then leave that probably about 10-15 minutes for the alcohol in this to evaporate and this to cure, and then I should probably then give this another coat or two and see whether it needs to be sanded back or anything. This, hopefully you can see now, has come up really, really nice and shiny. And it's had probably about 10 coats of shellac just wiped on, and then what I did, I just wet sanded it back with some 1200 paper. Gave it another 1 or 2 coats, and then a very, very light sand with the 1200 again, just to get rid of any bobbles, and just giving it one more coat, and that's come up really nicely, and it's nice and smooth, and as you can see there, really, really shiny. So shellac is really a nice finish. I'm just going to part this off now, and then I can then sand off the bottom and finish off the bottom. And there we go, there's the egg. As I say, I'll just sand off that bottom so that it's nice and smooth, and then give that a bit of a finish. I think with this, I was initially going to do the similar sort of thing with putting this in a different way. I'm going to cut this back off on the bandsaw again so that it's in half here, so it's a square, and mount it that way, and then create an egg cup in that smaller area there. Now I've just cut this off as a rough square and mount it roughly between centres, and same as with the other one, I'm going to true this up first of all, put a small tenon on it so I can get it back into the same jaws again. So I'm just going to use the spindle gouge now. The first thing I'm going to do before I take any of the sides down or anything is create the cup for the actual egg to sit in. So just so you can see, the line is about there where I want the egg cup to be. And before I do too much work on there, just test that the egg fits in okay, and that should be a nice fit. I'm unsure what I'm going to do for a shape on here. Right, I'm quite pleased with that. So I'm going to get that sanded up. Now I've sanded this all the way up through the grits to 600, and I'm just going to give this a coat of sanding sealer, or a couple of coats of sanding sealer like before with the egg, and hopefully this is where you'll see the colours really come out again. So I shall let that dry off. I shall sand it back a couple of times before I then start putting the shellac on again. This has now had a couple of coats of sanding sealer and sanded just to denib with the 600 again. So I'm going to apply this exactly the same way as I did before. Just literally wipe it on. Get a fair bit on my kitchen towel first of all to soak in. And it's just a case of wiping it on. I'll leave that only about 2 minutes before I then give it another coat, and I'll repeat that, and then I will then wet sand it back again with the 1200 grit to give it a final coat. This has now had several coats, and I did wet sand it back, and then I gave it another couple of coats, so it's reasonably smooth, but I can feel that there are the odd little lump in there. So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to really lightly sand this, just wet sand it, just to take off the little rough pieces, just like that, and that should just about be enough. And this is 1200 grit paper, so it's always worthwhile getting something that's quite fine. I mean, you could use micro mesh, but because of the shape it would be hard to get into. So just dry that off again, and that does feel a lot better. I'm going to give that one more light coat. That's a fresh piece of clean towel. Just let it soak in a bit and go over it. Just so it just really puts a thin layer on. So I just left this about 4 or 5 minutes, I suppose, and that's now dry. It's no tackiness whatsoever, and I've got a nice smooth surface, and hopefully you can see on the cameras there I've got a nice shine to it. So I'm just going to part this off now. So I've just got that nub on the bottom there, and I'll just sand that off flat, so that just tidies that up, and I shall then just probably give that a coat of shellac. Now I've got to say, this was a fun little project to do. I am really impressed with the shellac finish. It's super easy to put on. Shellac is cheap to buy. This has just literally had probably maybe up to about 10 coats, and you can literally wipe the shellac on, leave it for 2 to 5 minutes, and it is totally dry. It's not tacky, and you can build up a few layers. I then wet sanded it with 1200 grit paper first of all to take it fairly well back, to put a few more coats on, then a light sand, and then 1 or 2 final coats over the top really lightly, and it's come up really nice. Making things smaller always seems to be a lot harder to do than making things bigger. And just to give you an idea of dimensions there, I mean, that egg is probably just under 40 mil wide at its widest point there, and just over 50 mil long at its longest point there. So that's what, maybe 2 inches, and therefore you can just see the size of the cup as well. Thanks a lot for watching.